Hey everybody, it's Ken from Craig's Corner and Stan, and we're going to do our third consecutive talk today. Hopefully, most of you guys have seen the first two. Um, I'll give a super brief background. Stan and I have been pals since the early 70s. We were both students at SIUE. Stan's about 3 years ahead of me, and we actually met there through martial arts and become close pals over many years. Back then, we were both double majors in psych and philosophy, so we had a lot in common. Our mentalities were very similar, and we've stayed buddies all those years. And Stan has spent many years in his spiritual practice and um, working with energy healing and teaching other people how to do it and using it to help a lot of folks. Along those lines, he's a very deep, well-established metaphysical practice that he's been at for decades as well. Stan has some pretty unique perspectives on things. I think he sees things clearly in many ways. For the most part, I agree with almost everything that he's seen. There again, there's our connection spiritually, I'm sure. And so we talked the last couple of times. There were talks about the big current events going on with racial issues. And we've talked about before how there's a connection between that and how the world's changing and evolving. And during that process, a lot of negativity comes up that's been in the background, stirring around forever. And it manifests when there's about to be a big shift and a big change in the way we do things in the country and around the world. And so we were talking and thought that it would be good to go further and deeper in this talk about that topic, which really basically is, we'll just call it racism and spirituality will be the topic for today. And it may not make sense how those connect, but I think it will by the time we finish up. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Stan and let him kick this thing off, and maybe it'll start being apparent to you what we're getting at here. Go ahead, Stan.
Okay, I'd like to welcome everyone to this particular conversation. And it's typical, what I like to do is start off with a short 30-second meditation to clear our minds. Okay? All right, just be comfortable and begin. Okay, finish. Now, in the first two presentations we had, we were speaking on racism in more of a general context. And today we thought we would be able to sort of give a summary by having an approach that involves two parts. The first part would be more on the social experiences that we've had in terms of the problems regarding racism. The second part would be more the spirituality, which is more of the resolution of that problem, which includes a very base problem of human understanding, our very nature of how we understand ourselves and how we understand others, and particularly how we understand even the planet that we exist on. Now, when we look at racism in terms of on the social aspect of it, I've always considered that racism is more of a symptom of the problem. The word racist is really thrown out quite frequently nowadays, as well as the term racism. Although you have to understand, though, in that context, and that what creates a racist person, so to speak, is simply prejudice. So a lot of times people, when they have prejudice, it's like a virus, but it doesn't actually turn into what we call full-blown pneumonia. So in that sense, okay, it hasn't sort of generated that much of a problem. So in terms of Black people, we really don't have problems with people who are prejudiced But when you speak of racism, you're speaking of someone who could institutionalize laws and regulations that would prohibit a race from progressing socially. So again, racism is simply the tip or the end result of a prejudice. So if we're completely honest with ourselves, we understand being prejudiced is simply a normal condition, particularly in this country, because of the way we began the country by the concept of superiority of one race, particularly the white race, over others. So we had a problem or an issue dealing with both halves. Those people who were um, institutionalizing, okay, propagating the racist theory of white superiority, and those who were victimized by that. So you have that trauma and that pain shared between both the oppressor and the oppressed. And I believe that the best way to approach this problem is to really take a very good look at our history and to see how we began and how we, ended up where we are now. So there's been progress made, but from the perspective that I have, you can't reach a true change unless people change individually. In other words, there has to be a change deeply within the human heart and the human mind. So if you're really motivated in terms of how do you participate in resolving this issue of quote unquote racism, you look in the mirror and you look at who you are and how you became who you are and what you could change to make a better world. Because without a better individual, without better people, there cannot be a better world. So in that aspect, you can't really litigate or you can't really um, make laws or regulate something like racism because it stems from that prejudice, which is also fear. So in that regard, there has to be a change in mindset, a paradigm shift in the way we look at ourselves, the way we look at others, and the way we look at the world that we live in. Now, when we think of the work of Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, these were great individuals who were very responsible for initiating a social response, a social consciousness. But we have to keep in mind that Martin Luther King was taken out at a very early age. He barely even began his mission. So what he did was not follow through. So in that aspect, you can imagine if Martin Luther lived to a ripe old age of maybe 75 or 80 years old, what he could have accomplished. Because that consciousness that he really began to instigate, okay, and give energy to would have spread to others. Because the initial thing is that the proposal is not merely to deal with the oppression of Black, but the oppression of all people. So this begins as more of a human condition of our mindset and how we look at others in the world. If we can change the heart, particularly the heart, then that will start us on a position where we can deal with the issues directly and honestly. But I always look at the truth as being a hot and bitter pill. And I think it's been very difficult for people to truly look at the truth of our history because there are some very harsh realities that we have to consider, particularly when you look at the fact that the indigenous people of this continent are now residing in what we refer to as reservations. And we very rarely even mention the suffering of Native Americans. There was a statistic that a friend of mine brought up about how they're suffering from COVID, but we don't see that in the media, okay? We know about the lack of health care with African Americans, but even the Native Americans probably even, worse off. So we have to bring things into a larger perspective. We have to be willing to be very brutally honest with ourselves. So again, like I said, the truth is a very hot and bitter pill to swallow, but we need to go through that in order to really implement a true change inside.
Yeah, it's funny what you just said about Native Americans. That's been on my mind for about 3 days. That with all the talk, what's been going on is it flares up every now and then, but for the most part, the folks that were here first have gotten the rawest deal, on the planet, and I don't know why that keeps slipping into the background. I guess maybe because the nature of the psyche of Native American folks just doesn't seem to be currently as organized, or I'll even say combative about their plight for whatever reasons. I think, you know, all the forms of racial issues that exist here. I think it's yeah, I see it every day on my regular job. I mean, there's a certain amount of beat down psyches out there. The way you can see it, the way a lot of people are in the world, the way they behave. It's passed on, you know, within their family, and they've absorbed that, the energy of that, you know, the beat down psyche. And I think this is what, when you see documentaries on people on the reservations and you see the mentalities and the outrageous amount of alcoholism and drug abuse and poor health and just, you know, needing everything. And, you know, it's when people are that beat down, sometimes they just don't even have the energy to think about organizing in such a way to, you know, to for lack of a better phrase right now, force things to change, you know. But I'm really happy you said that, because that's been on my mind. I'm like, man, we just, that topic, as far as you know, other cultures within the bigger culture here, just doesn't seem to come up enough anymore. You know, I watched a phenomenal film on it was either Netflix or Amazon about a month ago that reminded me about the Trail of Tears. You know, the indigenous Americans who were forced out of the mountains in the east part in the U.S. and the Trail of Tears, and they're being forced to head out west to the reservations. And oh my God, that is a heartbreaking. You know, it's like the Death March of Bataan, and it happened right here, you know, in our country. You know, not that long ago, all things considered. So we still have all these crazy divisions and strange things going on. At the same time, like we were discussing for a minute before we went live here, that this is the grandest experiment on the planet in many ways. The idea of, at least initially anyway, of, you know, folks from anywhere and everywhere being able to come here and make a new life and start all over and participate in the grand experiment of folks from various cultures and subcultures and racial backgrounds all coming together and working together and creating a democratic nation, you know. So we've sure had our challenges to that original idea here lately a lot. One of the things I have to mention, because this has been on my mind too, and it ties in with everything else, it's not just a racial thing, it's also a generational thing. But I noticed when I showed up at the polls at 5:30 in the morning on election day, figuring, okay, I get here a half an hour before they open, most people won't be up. Ha! The first one I went to had a line probably a mile or more long. And as I drove around deciding I'm going to come back later, it was cold that morning. I drove around and I'm looking at, you know, the people. And one of the really heartwarming things I saw was not only a wide age range, but a huge range of younger folks. And they're saying right now we're setting records for the number of younger people who have registered to vote for the first time ever. And when I say younger, these are people that a lot of them could have been voting already for 5 years or more, and they chose not to. They are this time, see, and racially as well. Wow, I noticed quite a diversity, you know, and I'm like, I didn't know there were this many people in my general neighborhood area around here representing this many races. And I'm like, this is the coolest thing in the world, you know. Kind of reminded me of taking a trip to the United Nations or something. I mean, it was that obvious and that blatant. And it took me 3 tries to get to where I could finally get in line and not have to stand in line over 40 minutes just to get in to vote. It shows you folks want change. That's what this is about, all right? So this ties into the overall topic. And man, you get the energy of those young kids fired up, and which is about time, you know, because a lot of the millennials and the Zs have been getting a nasty rap from a lot of us in the older generations as being lazy, mama's boys and girls who stay home and live at home forever and don't do anything. And it's like, well, a lot of them are doing something now, and it's a good thing, you know, because it's got to be one of the most educated generations we've put out there. So sometimes maybe it takes the right stimulus for a new generation to go, okay, it's our turn. we're going to get in and we're going to kick some ass and we're going to change some things. And that's the vibe. That's the vibe that we're getting, you know. But as the vibe continues, the ugly dragon head has to raise up and get its last words out, you know. So I just wanted to interject those observations I've made here since election day.
Yeah, you know, I think what's really more important now than ever, we have access to this technology, but what we have to do in order to be more effective with it is we have to learn how to let our guard down, so to speak.
Yeah. Hey, Stan, check your mic. Hey, Stan, check your mic. Your volume dropped real bad.
Okay, let me see my volume. Okay, okay, I'll set that up. Testing, testing. Is that any better?
It's better. Yeah.
Okay, hold on.
Good.
Okay. Okay, you can hear me?
Yeah, it's pretty good now.
Okay, okay. It's my screen. Okay. Like I was saying, you know, we really are so defensive in terms of our own opinions and ideals. And what I mean by letting our guard down now, if anything that Ken and I could contribute is the ideal is that we can have conversations and be honest with one another. And more importantly, be honest with yourself. Because there's more than one view on any topic, on any ideal, okay? I once had a teacher that told me we should strive to see a topic from 8 different directions. And it kind of blew me away because it's hard enough for me to see it in 2 and 3. But he mentioned the word or the number of 8. And I think there's a sacred synergetic quality to that number because I think it refers to the 8 spokes of a wheel where you have the cross and you have the X. But I think that's the part of our evolution is to be able to see things with a detachment, with a compassion, but also at the same time a detachment where we don't feel possessive of our knowledge. And that way we can share and combine what we know, even though it may be different points of view, and we can come out with a greater whole. And this is the new paradigm in the way we are evolving in terms of learning. And that's going to also go into the teaching as well. So, you know, in the time span that we have, we can mention different references and sources, but be open to research any source, even sometimes people that you may not like personally. You have to separate their personality from the information that's coming out because the information can still be very pertinent and important, even though you may not like the person's personality. So we need to have those distinctions so we can truly develop more critical thinking and also more compassionate feelings towards the situation. When we look at the social aspects of it, we know how we experience uh, racism and how we also experience prejudice. I was very fortunate, I think, when I went to Cahokia High School in Illinois, because at the time that I was going, I think the ratio was about 80% Caucasian and 20%, you know, African American. And I got to witness a lot of situations where the white kids wanted to reach out. The kids normally do, but the structure that they imposed was such that it maintained a separation. Now, one example of that, which is very interesting, now, if a black athlete was very prowess, right, he wouldn't have any problem making a team, okay, football, basketball, whatever, track as well. But when we used to have dances called sock hops, there would be sort of an invisible line in the gymnasium floor where, let's say, if someone was African American, they strove over past that line, the teachers would just very, you know, gently and cordially just escort them to their half. So you had the black kids dancing on one half, the white on the other. So it didn't allow that. And as a young man, I was able to really observe without having any anger or hatred, and just thought it was very interesting how people are raised to have this fear of one another. And the fear is not only simply race, but it could also be social, economic. But the idea that's very important is to be able to have discussions and be able to increase your learning curve simply by accepting information and data, even though it may oppose, because actually, in reality, opposing forces at a higher level are complementary. So you can't have north without south. You can't have east without west. You have 2 columns, you may say. They're supporting one another, although they may be going in opposite directions. So the ideal is that when you meet opposition, how can you transmute that or transform it to complementary, or what I would call complementation? So that would be one of the learning topics in the future, is how to create balance and also harmony, how to take something that's opposite, but to still see the critical and important valuable assets of this and actually incorporate it in the greater whole. So we'll be able to communicate, from different levels and also from different viewpoints, but we'll be able to accept and understand one another's viewpoint. So I think if anything Ken and I are doing that's really valuable at this point is to try to open up that door of discussion. And another thing is that if you really feel passionate about this subject of racism, then you have to be proactive. Not only do you have to do your own research, but when you see it in your family or your friends, and that is someone being racist, you have to call it out. You have to say something. You have to stand for something. So also you have to have courage as well as motivation in order to be a participant of this overall change that we're speaking about. Ken, you have anything to?
Yeah. What's occurring to me there is how weird it is. This is the grand experiment, the melting pot, right? Where supposedly our doors are open to people from all over the world to come here and live together. And what has happened over and over and over again? Let's think about, I'm thinking of like Gangs in New York, or whatever that movie was, but it's true, for at first the one group's running the town, and then the next thing the Irish come in and they're at the low heap, and then the Jewish folks come in and now they're lower down on the totem pole, and that this constant thing that has gone on forever, but in a way, the African American one is one of the weirdest because that wasn't by choice. These are people yanked out of their homes, out of their country, thrown on ships and pulled over here to be worked like mules. I mean, that in itself makes it unique and different and more, what's a good way to phrase it? More unacceptable, It's, to me, the two biggest ones right there are that one. And then what we talked about earlier, the indigenous folks that were here before any of us came over, and how they've been treated and shoved off their own land. And I'll tell you, we talk about that, it's kind of like a karmic spinning wheel here. Something's going to change that one of these days too. I don't see it happening in our lifetime, but man, that has to end, that just has to end too. But yeah, what I was getting at, my main point I wanted to make is the idea that this is supposed to be the melting pot where everyone's welcome, and yet it has shifted so many times. This group comes from such and such a country, and Stan nailed it with socioeconomic. That's a huge part of it too, because folks who are coming over because, say, the potato famine, okay, they're coming from Ireland. People are starving, so they come from Ireland looking for a better life, but they're considered the dogs because they don't have anything, and they're considered burdens. And yet what happens before you know it, they begin to organize and get together, and then they start working out in the railroads. And, the same thing happened to the Chinese. It's just amazing how this thing repeats itself. So something has to happen to break that cycle. I mean, if we're supposed to be the open arm country, which obviously right now we're not, but I don't think that has much to do with most of us on the street. That has to do with an ages old fear-based, I'll stop right there. I'm going to get going. It's going to get nasty, but we'll leave it alone for a minute. Where I'm headed with it, but we'll let that go. So
okay,
now,
we'll let you get nasty some other time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But what we're combining is that the fact is that we may have some insights that may be valuable, in this time span, but we really just want to encourage people to be open enough to do their own research. We don't have to mention people by name or different sources, because your heart and your mind will lead you to what you need to read, what you need to research. But we have to overcome the stigma of what you call the pride of America, because we're afraid to look at some of the ugliness that has happened, because we think they put shame on our country, and it really doesn't. Everyone has both pro and con. Everyone has, positive and negative, but we just have to affect that we've had issues on a human level, because if we can look at it from a human level, then we can accept it. Because if you truly love someone or something, you will be with this particular person until the very end, through sickness or through wellness, through good to bad times. So we have some sickness in America, but again, if you truly love the country, then you will stick with this issue because you can have an impact. You can make a small contribution. Okay? I think what's positive now is that there is an evolutionary process dealing with our consciousness. Some people may call it a spiritual awakening. There's many different terms related to this because our basic problem when we consider ourselves as human in our lifetime as being so limited, right? We have this fear of who we are. So we tend to fight ourselves and fight nature, okay? So the predominant concept has been man having power over nature. And if you feel like nature is your opponent, which is ridiculous because without nature you couldn't even exist, then you're gonna think of other humans as well. So we live with this concept of power over. That's been the old paradigm, it's changing, power over. And it's been an illusion. There's no such thing as power over. When you see nature, you don't see power over, you see a harmonious interaction. So we have to go from power over to power with. We share power because we're all from the same source. And this is how nature actually functions, it's power with.
Now, interesting if this original group we've been talking about, the indigenous Native Americans, almost anybody knows now that that's how they lived, in harmony with, you know, and Stan and I talked about this for a minute before we jumped on, but look into the extreme connection between climate change, racism, and COVID-19. They're completely interconnected. It might seem like that's crazy. Look into it. I'm putting that challenge out there for folks. And you know specifically why I said that, but yeah, Stan just hit that nail on the head. You know, it's all these things are connected, and you know, the power paradigm has never worked. What happens? One group gets in power, and then there's a war, and then a bunch of people get killed, and now a new group's in power, and then there's another war. I mean, come on, how many times do we have to learn that lesson over and over again, in micro ways and in, you know, macro ways? It's dead. Give it up. No reason for it anymore. There's really no excuse to kill anybody for any reason, to hate people for any reason. You know, it's unacceptable. And we all hopefully can realize that those two things right there are what stop anything from evolving. It pulls us right back into the same loop all over again, you know? And you know, all that is fear motivated stuff. And Sam said it before, it's all about fear. What is it that you're so afraid of? Why should people be afraid to learn new things and evolve and be stronger from it? Because that's really what happens. That's really what happens, you know?
The concept that you just brought up, Ken, about fear consciousness is so important for people to realize because we've evolved greatly technologically, but we still, you know, conduct wars and so forth. But we've gone from the club to nuclear arms. So we cannot afford, you know, to have that old paradigm in effect. If so, it's not that the earth will be destroyed, but the earth will find a way to get rid of the human species, period. Because we're a threat, okay? The earth has been here and through many other changes, you know, ice ages, you name it, polar shifts, you name it. So we're thinking we can destroy the earth? No, that's just a high level of arrogance you can't believe.
Yeah.
No, the earth will get rid of us if we can't cohabit with it. So we can't afford to have that old paradigm. So the spiritual awakening, if I can use that term, relates to understanding what I call three elements: who we are, what we are, and where we are. Those three things, those three elements and factors are opening up now. We're getting a wider vision of spiritually who we are. So we will transcend the fear of death, the fear of conflict, because we will understand that energetically that we are a part of the universe and that change is always necessary. It's inevitable. So we'll have a higher understanding of, again, what our purpose is on this planet right now. Because when you look at the shift that we're going through, where scientists are researching spirituality is research in science, some of the top people are actually agreeing, particularly with the advent of quantum physics as well as some of the things that we've learned from Zen Buddhism, okay, and other spirituality. They know that the world that we live in is simply a projection. We're creating our reality. So why would we continue to create war and conflict? What's the benefit? And like I said, we reached a tipping point that if we keep on with this behavior, it threatens our existence here. So there has to be a highest understanding. And I think really from that, it really emanates a lot from our heart, from love and compassion. Many people think love and compassion is actually weak. Just like a lot of times for manhood, if you see a man cry or he shows a lot of empathy and compassion, typically you would think of him as being weak. But it's actually, in reality, it's just the opposite of that. So I think right now, a lot of people are giving feedback and testimony that their heart seems to be expanding now. Men are able to, deal with their feminine side. Women are becoming even more hypersensitive in the word now. That's why the female will actually lead this part of the evolution. And we see it right now. A lot of women are becoming leaders and so forth. Yeah, because we need that energy balance between the yin and the yang. But the most important thing, I think, with Ken and I getting together like this is try to really emphasize that, you should do your own research. You should follow your mind and your heart, trust your instincts and your intuition, study, but have an open mind. And above all, learn to think critically. Because a lot of people, when they have discussions, Ken and I don't agree with everything. He was very generous when he said 90%. I'll put more like 80%. So I don't think we're actually 100% yet. But people, when they have conversations, yeah, they do this too much rather than one being passive and listening. See? So we need to understand how to assimilate knowledge and then actually be able to apply it.
There you go. Okay, well, yeah, hopefully what we're accomplishing here is just stimulating people and reminding people. And there's certain things that have been repeated today that you've heard in the last two talks, and that's delivery. Because there you can see there's a major message that we're just trying to get across here, which is open your mind, open your heart, and work to grow. Now, don't, so many folks are so afraid they're going to lose something by changing the way they function in the world, And what I've learned and been learning since I was quite young, and Stan has too, that this is the benefit of going to a university that has a diverse population, because so many of us, if we grew up in rural areas, we're used to frequently being around just one race, and one nationality. And hey, this is the melting pot. This is the United States, We're supposed to embrace everyone and learn. And, it's comical because I'm 66 now, and I think about all the different ways that I've been exposed to folks from other culture. And I have to say, most of it started for me in college more than anything else, because I'm looking around, there's these Asian kids, and there's these Middle Eastern kids, and, African-American kids. I went to school in an area in Illinois where there was, interracial, and, it wasn't ever even an issue. I remember all this stuff in the 60s started, and I'm like, I remember we'd be they'd bring a TV in the classroom, and we'd be looking at, looking at some big riot going on, and we're all looking around at each other like, really? Because we just didn't act like that. I don't know. It was some funny little microcosmic thing, but we were all together. We didn't have like a big obvious racial divide thing going on in our school for whatever reason. I guess maybe it was there in some other undercurrent implied way, but it wasn't anything blatant. We'd get out on the playground and play together, and it was no big deal. So anyhow, that aside, you start getting around folks from other cultures. And the reason I'm saying this is not everybody gets to go to college. And right now, a lot of people are going to college online, like we're talking, and, they're not having this experience where you're suddenly thrust into a class. That's probably 75% of the real purpose of going to a campus, so that you meet people, you network. It's good for international business because you become friends with folks from other cultures, and you start learning really cool things. I mean, I knew nothing about Hispanic culture and until I was in college, and started meeting people. And next thing you know, I have a buddy from Panama, and I go to Panama, and we backpack in Panama and Costa Rica, and I stay with his family. And one thing leads to another, and and you start to embrace these things, the music and the food, and oh my gosh, what it does is it starts to shrink the divisions, right? And you start going, huh, wow, this person's skin is very different in there. Your bone structure is different inside. But guess what? They still want to just live. They have to eat. They like music. They want to dance. It all just turns into realizing that everybody's at the core the same. Once you get past the superficial stuff, and yet the differences are the part that start to make things interesting, and it expands and fulfills your daily experience. It turns you on to food, like I said, food and music and other traditions that just enliven you. The thing of the separate thing, it's like, oh, no, my family's, I'm just throwing this out there, my family's traditionally German, we'll say, and that's not the case. I'm a mixed up mutt big time. So, but let's just use that as an example. So they live in some tiny little village in central Illinois, and they've never experienced any other culture other than overall general American culture. But there's little enclaves all over the country that are a specific group, and they, that group has gone on and on for generations, and they still very traditional in the old ways of their country, and it's tough for some people to expand because they're not exposed to it. So that's another thing I'm trying to say is we're trying, if you're one of those folks stuck in that shell, open up. With the internet now, there's really no excuse. I mean, you can get out there, get on Facebook, and just start making friends. I've had this experience with a lot of people in Southeast Asia in the last few years. You start making friends with people in other countries, and you're talking to them like we are, and you can do it. If nothing else, you can sit right there and do it on Messenger through Facebook. And what does that cost you? It's not like the old days trying to make a long distance call. There's no excuse for not reaching out there and meeting folks all over the place. It's the greatest, right? So I think this is what I wanted to get out there today, is that the more that you reach out to do that, just playing around on Facebook or whatever platform you use, and making an attempt to try to meet folks from other countries and other cultures, it starts to break all this junk down, because you start to get friendly and you start to learn about them and their ways, and that fear factor goes away, and I think that's one of the most important things. I really get a kick out of these folks now on YouTube being such a powerful tool, right? But I've mentioned this guy before. There's a guy on there who's an American Jewish kid up in New York who happens to be fluent in Chinese. And he has so much fun going into Chinatown, walking into restaurants. He'll start off in English, and the next thing you know, he slips right into fluent Mandarin, and it's all of a sudden the people working there, like, you'll see them, their heads are turning, like, is that, did he just do what we think he did? And all of a sudden the vibe of the whole room changes, right? Because why? Because this one guy has made an attempt to break down these barriers using the core factor, which is language, right? And it's really heartwarming to see the ripple effect that happens. And then all of a sudden, people who are over sitting at their table in their own little corner, they want to come over and start talking to this guy. How do you learn Mandarin so well? And then he goes around and does this with different languages. This guy's becoming like a super language genius. And, he uses all these various programs, and he crams himself, and he's picking up different dialects of Chinese, and he's picking up, then he finally did Spanish, which, in my opinion, we should all be starting to speak Spanish when we're, 3 years old, regardless of, because it's such a big second language in this country. But I'm just trying to get the point out there that that's one simple major way that people can begin the process of breaking out of their little divisive, fear-based shells, and that is to make an effort using the vehicles of, say, Facebook and YouTube alone, and because they'll connect you to these folks. And I know this is already happening, but it needs to happen on a larger scale. It probably needs to even happen more with guys in our age range that would be less likely to do that. It's a lot of the older folks that are the most narrow sometimes. It can go either way. Look at us. The older we've gotten, the more open we get. But we were like that anyway. See, so that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of folks who aren't naturally that way. But if they're encouraged to do it and they take a chance and do it, It just helps bring all these walls down. And that's going to be our best way, I think, in the immediate future to start to bring this stuff down, you know, and get people to connect more. And it's fun and it's fascinating.
Yeah, part of the evolutionary process has been described as returning to the source. So when you look at culture and customs, these things are just simply made up by humans. You know, they don't really show the truth or the reality behind it because they're man-made. It's just like the continental mass of Europe. You know, I don't know how many countries actually is in Western Europe, maybe 20 or 30, I don't know the number, but you know, the landmass itself is not divided. You know, there's no real division between, let's say, Germany and France and Holland and so forth. These things are man-made. So with our way of thinking, we usually take these symbols or these categories and we project them as realities, just like we do with race. Race has been an ongoing evolution ever since we came here. There's no such thing as a pure black and white because we've always been going through transitions. The categories only given so that we can study particular traits, you know, that's relegated to a particular group. So even within the African, you can call it, there's no such thing as African American, that's just okay. But I would just say the black race. If you look at the characteristics of people from Western Africa, Northern and Eastern, particularly between Eastern and Western, you will see different traits, okay? And if you look at the Dravidians as well as the Indians, okay, of Asia, you see different traits. They may share a darker skin color, but the hair will be different, or the eye will be different. So race has been an ongoing process, and it had to begin with one people. This is why, you know, sociologists or archaeologists say that, you know, we begin with the African race. Okay, well, okay, if that's true, it's just a pity to the fact is that we all have pretty much the same inherent DNA. So these things are just being used for socioeconomic advantage and as a means of propaganda. So as we return back to the source, we're returning back to the spiritual truth, and that is we're all one, we've always been one, and we will always be one. All division is simply illusion. There is no such separation. And this is where spirituality and physics are coming together. They're seeing that. There's no separation. Just like in Nassim Haramein, who's a very, what I call, advanced physicist, or you can say very progressive, states that in 1 centimeter of space, okay, 1 cubic centimeter of space, there's enough energy to run all our technology for 1,000,000 years.
Yeah.
So if you look at empty space, it's empty, it's not.
No.
There's no such thing, okay? So we have to understand this fact of, you know, we are so reliant on what we take in with our 5 senses. But that's just one process that we're going through. And we've been relying on that because of our thought, okay, pattern, the full paradigm. So we're shifting now. So when Ken and I look at each other, it's because from a young age, you know, we didn't have that stigma really ingrained in us. Plus, we came with pretty similar socioeconomic backgrounds. So we dealt with each other more on our personality, our characteristics, our likes and dislikes, not on the feature. We noticed that we're different race quite naturally, right? Okay, but that was not a factor. And this is what we're coming back to the source, seeing people as one, and with the heart being able to treat one another in that same accord. Now, this is a very broad topic that we're speaking. We're just covering the outer realm, so there's so many details to go into, but you know, we may be able to repeat, you know, another, not on, I think of this factor, we may go into COVID or whatever and speak, but like Ken said and myself, that if we could just initiate or motivate, encourage people to do their own research and have open discussions, I think that's probably the most important effect that any of these talks can do.
Yeah. And I think, you know, do what we're doing, man. This is free, right? Let's get it out there. And I'm seeing more and more of this kind of thing happening. I know you guys are too. And I think this is good because this isn't a formalized, structured, you know, Joe Rogan talks on this or whatever, which is, all that stuff's good too. I'm just saying that this is just a couple of guys getting together and talking about their perspective based on many years of life experience and having open attitudes and wanting to bring people together, not divide people. And I think the more of us that get out here and say this, And any of you guys can do it out there. You just do what we did, right? Pick the topic and go at it, but just keep it positive and evolving, hopefully, rather than, there's enough people out there now that are already, my dog's bigger than your dog, or my dog can bite harder than your dog, or however you want to frame it, nonsense that goes on out there, and all that hateful stuff. We don't need any more of that, so. All right, I hope you guys will take some of this stuff to heart, and that's all we're trying to stimulate you to do. So we'll be back again, and hopefully it won't be too long from now.